Okay, I want to be considerate of everyone's time, so let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Paula McCain, and I'm a recovery business advisor for the Small Business Development Center of North Central Texas. Don't know if you realized it uh, or not. Today is National Opposite Day and National Irish Coffee Day. No one really likes Irish coffee, so. Anyway, the SBDC is the leading provider of assistance for small businesses, and we are grant funded. And because of that, we can offer you services and resources such as today's webinar at no cost. We're really excited to start this series, Introduction to QuickBooks Online Part 1, with Stacy Kildall and Bryce Forney. If you would put your questions or comments in the chat room, and we'll get to them whenever the presenters are ready. I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm just going to turn it over to Stacy and Bryce. Thanks so much. We're so excited about the QuickBooks series.
Super. And we're glad.
Thank you, Paula.
Sure.
Appreciate it. We're very glad to be here, and we see that there's a bunch of people here. We're very excited. This is going to be, we have 90 minutes allotted, but we always leave a little bit of extra time at the end for any Q&A. We do ask if you can mute yourself, and if you do have a question, there is the option to raise your hand if you want. Down at the bottom, you'll see a little emoji, a little happy face emoji. If you click on that, you can raise your hand. And if you have any questions, we can call on you and you can ask questions. There is also the ability to put questions in the chat, and we will both be monitoring those because we'll be going back and forth speaking. So just a little admin.
So we're going to start with a quick introduction just so you understand the background from which Stacy and I come from. Stacy, what should we know about you?
There's not much lately. My name is Stacy Kildall, and I own and operate Kildall Services. I'm a full-service bookkeeping firm. I specialize in QuickBooks. It's really the only accounting platform that we support. We do anything that has to do with QuickBooks. We do setup, training, we do cleanups, payroll. If it's QuickBooks, we do it. I live in Michigan. I live about right here in Michigan. So if you look at the map of Michigan, I'm right there. I have it makes me sound insane when I say it out loud, but I have 5 cats, and you may see one or more. We're probably going to shut off our cameras once we get into content, but just FYI, I do have a lot of them, and that's about it. I've been a trainer for Intuit since about 2005, and I've been using QuickBooks since 1998. 99.
98, 99.
It's been a really long time.
Sometime around that. My name is Bryce Forney. I'm a CPA, so I'm a sole proprietor, and I spend my time, make my living, preparing tax returns. So I believe in just the simplicity of being profitable and getting those figures accurately and completely onto a tax return. So not everyone's dream career, but I like it, so it works for me. So with that, our agenda overall today, this is part 1. We're breaking this down into two sessions. Mm-hmm. So the ones in bold there, we're going to talk about the Intuit product line, navigation around QuickBooks Online, QBO, and then go into some workflows. So I need to figure out how to, my apologies, I'm just trying to get the
I think you're muted.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've noticed that the WebEx keeps randomly muting me as well. So just FYI, gotta kind of keep your eye on that mute button.
Okay. Okay, great. So hopefully I'm not muted at this point.
Yeah, I'm gonna close my camera just to keep the bandwidth down so that it works a little bit better. And if our attendees can all mute themselves, that would be great. Otherwise, we're gonna get an echo while we're speaking.
Okay, so with that,
yeah, before we get started, if everybody
yeah.
can mute, because we're getting a lot of echo, a lot of background noise. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Okay, so Intuit serves a few different customer families. The primary customer base is the small business owner. And for the small business owner, Intuit offers QuickBooks Online, which is what we're going to talk about today, QuickBooks Self-Employed, which is a kind of a, a simpler version to do some very simple money in, money out accounting that's associated specifically with tax lines for a sole proprietor. And then there's QuickBooks Payroll, which works within QuickBooks Online. The other family of customers for Intuit is individuals. And for individuals, Intuit offers TurboTax, which is well known. There's Mint, which is it's sort of the web equivalent of Quicken, which is a product Intuit had for a long time. And then there's QuickBooks Time, which allows employees to enter time to go into payroll for an employer.
Yep.
And then
I want to just say I
yeah.
really like Mint. I use that personally for my personal stuff, and it's pretty great, especially since it's free. I mean, you have to deal with some ads and stuff, but it's a really great product to keep track of everything.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's pretty neat that that it is free. The ads are worth it for what it does.
It really is, and what I like too, one of the things that a lot of people don't realize that is it'll it'll update your credit score, which I'm insane about monitoring. So I get very upset if it drops by even 2 points. So I really like that, and it gives you a nice, if you connect everything, it gives you a really cool net worth picture. So it's pretty cool. I mean, if you haven't seen it, it's not great for business because it's not what it's intended for, but personally, it's pretty cool. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say about Mint. I like it.
Okay. And then the QuickBooks Online family, if we focus just on QBO, we'll be calling it QBO. We'll be saving that syllable for all of the time. So with QBO specifically, there are 4 different editions. And then there's also QuickBooks Self-Employed that we referred to earlier, that's that simpler thing. And the reason there's this delineation and the green X is because QuickBooks Self-Employed does not currently migrate into QBO. And we mention that because it looks a lot like QBO. So it would seem like you could just click somewhere and say, hey, make this QBO. I want the fuller functionality, but that is not the case. They are on separate islands currently.
Yeah.
So with Simple Start, that's for a sole practitioner, so one company user. And then Essentials adds some elements so you can, you know what, Simple Start says ANR and AP, and I'm thinking
It does not support AP. It supports
okay,
AR. So
so that's a lie.
that
I didn't really.
that is not correct. But it does allow you to add payroll. It does allow you to add apps. It does not allow for like 1099 tracking either. But it's a really, if you're if you're just starting out, I think it's like as a full business. I think self-employed works really well for people who have side gigs. And I think if you're actually starting out, when you first start with your business, I think Simple Start works the best. My experience is that I have about 45 clients, monthly clients that I do bookkeeping for. And the majority of them are on Plus. They're going to be on QuickBooks Online Plus, because that gives you, estimates and purchase orders and inventory, and some things like that.
And so those are all the QBO additions. And then also with QBO, one of the neat things is it connects to third-party applications. So the idea is if you were, for example, dealing with heavy inventory needs, you have to do serial inventory or something.
Or you have assemblies.
Right.
That's the other thing too with inventory. Or you just have something that is very, very specific, like like a very specific type of business. Maybe you are an attorney. You might want time slips or something like that, just to add features.
So you can
QBO
add functionality to QBO without having to move up in an addition. And these connect really strong with QBO. So the benefit of using a third-party app is going to be that you can keep the people out of QBO who don't need to be in QBO, while still giving them the ability to see. So we think classically of a salesperson who certainly wants to access the customer list and create estimates, that sort of thing. But you don't necessarily want that person within QBO to see, all of payroll or all of the vendor side of things. So that's the benefit of a third-party app. So that's kind of the QBO system, as well as the products that Intuit provides overall. So next, we're going to move into workflows within QBO. And this is where the rubber meets the road for you to be able to most accurately, most completely account for a business. So
I'm gonna,
yeah,
if you don't mind, I'd like
I
to
do not.
ask a question. Show of hands, how many of you guys, if you can raise your hands, this is a really good um, option to make sure everybody knows how to raise their hand. How many of you guys are already using QuickBooks Online, the online version of QuickBooks? There's a little emoji, it says reactions if you hover over. If you can, I see Cynthia's raising her actual hand on camera, which is awesome.
Doing it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, okay. Doesn't look like anybody else is. Cool, but that's okay because we're gonna show you how to use it.
I think Troy said that no, M. Montgomery and Troy have also said.
Okay. Oh, there they are. I see them. Yay. Little hands raised. I like to ask questions as we go just to gauge participation.
So it's really important with accounting workflows we've got this really great ability with QBO to get the information, to get the transactions directly from the bank and credit cards. So that creates, accurate figures, and then working through creating an invoice, then doing a received payment, then doing a deposit, the workflows of sales, the workflows of purchases, which we're going to go through, are critical to success, because if you do those steps out of order or skip a step, and we're going to talk about some of those things that happen, that can really make the accounting go haywire. It's one thing that you get inaccurate information, but it also has a ricochet effect on working with an accounting professional, because then it creates I'm not sure what the diplomatic term is, Stacy, like it creates a real haywire situation. So that could be
It creates
costly.
unexpected results.
Thank you.
We'll say that. And I think it's pretty important to talk about those workflows, and we'll get into it. This screen, somebody was asking if we were talking about desktop. This is Intro to QuickBooks Online, so we're going to be just discussing the QuickBooks Online product and the workflows in there. What you'll find if you're using desktop, The workflows are pretty much the same. It's just where you go to do those workflows are going to be different because they're different products.
So we just want to set a definition for how a business accounts. And there's the cash method and the accrual method, each of which has its own workflow within QBO. So a cash basis business recognizes
Well,
income.
I'm going to
Yeah.
argue with that. I'm going to
Okay.
argue with
Please
that
do.
because you can look at reports on a cash basis or accrual basis, but sometimes the workflow could be the same regardless of what you're doing. I mean, you
Okay.
may do enter bill, pay bill, but you still might be looking at reports on a cash basis.
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely true.
Yeah.
But thinking more about how the business operates, that I think of as what we're defining this for, to know what steps we're going to take through QBO. So for a cash basis business, they're recognizing income and receiving payment at the same moment. So think of the grocery store or a restaurant. They're receiving income and they're getting paid. Whereas on accrual, that's applicable to, say, an architect or engineer, where they're going to be doing work, they're going to send out an invoice, and then the customer is going to pay over some period of time, whether it's a few days or a week or 15 days, something like that. So the workflows differ based on whether the business is primarily a cash-based
I
business.
disagree. I'm cash based.
Okay.
I do invoices. I have a lot of cash based clients who do invoices and enter bills, but they're cash basis.
Okay.
I think that cash versus accrual is really more about reporting than it is necessarily workflow because the workflows can be the same.
Okay.
Okay.
So next we're going to talk about looking into QBO and what we see within. And I think what we'll do is just show actual QBO. If I can get to the right screen here. So, and better yet, so where we are, we're in a test company called Craig's Design and Landscaping. So actually everyone has access to go into this sample. It's called QBO Test Drive. So you can just Google QBO Test Drive and that'll bring
I'll
you to
put
this
them in
area.
the links. I will put the test drive
Oh,
links in the chat.
wonderful.
Yeah.
So with Craig's Design and Landscaping, it has some data in here, so we can actually do things within this sample company and try it out. So here, just focusing on the navigation, when you first get into QBO, you've got the dashboard. Something else, Stacy?
No, that was
Okay,
a beep.
cool. You've got the dashboard, and this shows the workflow around money in, money out, and then reporting. So we can also look at an overview of the business by clicking on Business Overview tab. And here we can see these cards that provide insight about how is the business performing, and also to give a insight about what invoices need to be paid, that sort of thing. And then it's got a quick reference to the banking activity. So on our left navigation, the one area you'll be in quite a bit is, as you know, a business owner or the one who's doing the doing when it comes to transaction entry.
I
It's the
love that
banking area.
phrase.
And this is also, there's a different view. So this may say transactions. So let me just switch to that.
Yeah, and the reason why, just while he's switching this up, the reason why you may see something just slightly different is there's a couple different reasons actually. One is we are logged in as the accountant user, so we have a different view as the accounting firm or the accountant user. And then sometimes there are updates to the UI or feature updates. And the way that Intuit does their updates on QBO is they roll those out in in what are called clusters. So they roll them out to different segments of QBO subscriptions at a time. So if you have a brand new subscription that you start today, you're going to have, you may have a completely different view than, you know, an account that was set up 6 months ago. But that account that was set up 6 months ago eventually will kind of catch up to the newer subscription levels. So don't worry if you are seeing something, if you're using QBO and you're seeing something just a little bit different than what you see here.
And we're going to stay in banking, and we're going to stay in this, we're going to stay in accountant view. The reason is the screens weren't refreshing, and that happens sometimes in the sample company where the screens don't all come up. Like if you go into payroll and you try to process payroll, it's not going to be able to do that. So we're just going to stay here for consistency. So just working down the left navigation. So banking is where many business owners go to enter the transactions, or the bookkeeper, whoever's doing transaction entry. Bank feed is typically that mainline source to get transactions into the books. And then there's a sales area, which contains different different tabs. So with sales, it's going to show you this money bar at the top where we start with things that have not yet been billed and then to invoices that are outstanding and open, overdue, and then it even shows you what invoices have been paid. So that money bar is pretty cool. And then we see the detail down below in a grid for what the money bar reflects. And then there's akin to sales, we're switching to money out. We've got an expenses area, and the expenses just shows a list of all of our expenses that we've entered. And then we can also access our vendor list and the money out money bar at the top of expenses. And then we've got payroll, we've got reporting, so we can look at any of the reports, and we've got some favorites here. There's a taxes section for sales tax and 1099s, and also payroll tax if you have payroll turned on. And then there's the chart of accounts. There's a My Accountant area where where the business owner can communicate, share documents, and answer questions.
This is super helpful. Yeah. I just want to comment on this. I have quite a few clients who, when it is time for me to do their bank reconciliations or the end of the month hits, rather than having to set me up as a user on their accounts or having to, you know, download statements and then email me those statements, they will just upload them here or any other documentation that I need. And it's really wonderful because everybody has access to the documents right in one place. So it's super easy to find. I love the shared documents in the My Accountant area. I just want to comment on that.
And then, so that's the left navigation. And then we also have like a structural behind the scenes area where we can click on the gear icon in the far upper right. And this shows us, this is kind of like the desktop equivalent of edit preferences. So here in the gear icon, we can go into account and settings, and that'll be all of the under the hood type things that we want to set about the company. We can also see how we're doing against usage limits. If we're in QBO Essentials and we're at maximum of 3 company users, it'll tell us that, you know, we may want to consider going to QBO Plus. And here it's suggesting that we may want to upgrade to QBO Advanced. So there's some sales pitch in this, but it gives you an overall look. And then we can also go here to manage the users of the company. So we have regular company users, and then we have accounting firms, the accounting professionals who are connected.
And so with Essentials, with Simple Start Essentials and Plus, the business owner, the small business owner, they can invite 2 accountant users. Ideally, at least for my clients, I don't know that it's ideally. In my experience, it's generally going to be me as the bookkeeper and the tax preparer. So, you know, Bryce is the tax preparer, so it might be myself and Bryce. And then with QuickBooks Online Advanced, you get 3. And for my QBO Advanced clients, what I have learned is They tend to have obviously a little bit more complex requirements. So the third accountant user is pretty great because they'll have me kind of as an outside consultant, sort of helping, and then they'll have their internal, full-time accounting professional, their controller, and then their tax preparer.
So that's the account and settings, and then we also have other things that we can do here off of the gear icon. So we can get to any of our lists within QBO, even though there are always a few different ways to get into really any function within QBO. So this is one shortcut to many of those elements. So that's the gear icon. And then finally here about general navigation, when we're going to enter a transaction and we're not doing it through the bank feed center or through transactions, we can use this plus new. Plus new in the upper left is where we go to enter any transaction. So it doesn't matter whether it's money in or money out. You can always go to plus new. So I like the plus new because it's one place to go where you don't have to worry, oh, am I thinking about sales? Am I thinking about expenses? Am I going to go to the vendor center? Here you can just enter a transaction right off the plus new. So we want to invoice a customer. We can type in the customer's name and it's going to allow us to create that transaction.
Yeah. And just when we're talking about the navigation, so the left nav bar, that's kind of where you find your different centers, like your vendor center, your customer center, your payroll center. That gear icon, that is going to be mostly where you're going to have setup information, where you're going to do a lot of setup stuff. And then the plus new, like Bryce said, is going to be regardless of what page that you are on in QBO, where you can go to create any new transactions.
Is there anything else in terms of navigation that?
The only thing that I would say is one of the things that people don't realize are the multiple tabs, that you can have as many tabs open as you want.
Well, how do you do that, Stacy?
Well, you can do that a variety of ways, Bryce. You could take your report center there and you can just, right from the left nav, you can drag the reports up to a new tab in your browser. Just like that, just drag and drop it. It's pretty handy. The other thing, and then you can navigate wherever you need to. So you can have these different tabs in your browsers open. They work kind of independently, but if you have your reports open and you create a transaction in another tab, it will automatically refresh, or you can simply refresh it if you need to. This is pretty handy when you're doing maybe a bank reconciliation or you're managing bank fees. And then the other thing that you can do to open a new tab would be to right click on the tab that you have open and click duplicate or duplicate, however you would like to pronounce that. And it's pretty, I love that. And what's neat is, I mean, you don't have to show it, but if you have multiple monitors, which I know a lot of people have multiple monitors these days, and you're doing a couple things, maybe you have an estimate open in one screen, or you have an invoice open. If you're doing a few things at once, or you need to look at reports while you're entering transactions, you can actually tear or pull those tabs off into a separate window and have your windows on different monitors or side by side or whatever. So a lot of people who are used to desktop, this is one of the first things they say when they move to QBO is, where is my open window list? And the thing about QBO is there is no open window list. You can have 100 tabs open in your browser that are all different places in QBO, although I don't know why you would want that many. I don't know how efficient or productive that would be, but you could do that if you wanted to. So I think that's it as far as navigation.
Super.
Yeah.
Great.
Do you guys have any questions? You can pop them in the chat if you want. Nope. Okay. Just checking.
Okay. So next we're going to talk about the mobile app, which is another way to enter transactions into QBO. I personally could not be more excited about the mobile app. And the reason is The mobile app allows any business owner or user to enter transactions out in the field. So a contractor who stops at Home Depot to get supplies for a job can actually shoot a photo of the receipt, and that may be all that he or she does,
Hmm.
or they can actually enter all of the details of the transaction. They can say the Home Depot was the vendor, here's the amount, here's what job it's associated with. So it's pretty phenomenal because, and I think it reflects my excitement about it, and Stacy's too, I think, is because for the more we can get those receipts entered closer to point of purchase, the more accurate the books are and the less of the recollection that has to go on.
Exactly. And I mean, even if, like Bryce said, even if you don't know what to do with it, you're working with an accounting professional, you can still upload it. And Intuit has a feature called receipt capture, and if you take the picture, it will just kind of sit in the receipt capture screen, and then your accounting nerd like me can go in and make sure that it's posted correctly, and get everything in there.
So these are some of the screenshots of the mobile app, just showing more or less what you're going to see in different areas of the mobile app. I would kind of like to show it, but I don't have the technology to be, or skill really, to be able to show it off specifically. But as we mentioned, the major thing is you can see the fourth box over here. There's a receipt snap.
Yeah.
So that's one that just makes it easy. If all we get a business owner to do is do receipt snap, that has a huge impact on the accuracy of the information that's in QBO, because
Yeah.
now we can see what was purchased, how much, etc.
The other thing about it is the mobile app, you don't have to have an active QBO subscription to like check out the mobile app. You can actually use it with the sample file, I think. Like when you download it, you
Oh,
don't necessarily have to have an active QBO subscription. I think it still lets you sort of um like play with it.
right. So it can also be used in the field. So if a business is using iPad or tablet to do estimates at that moment, they can actually use the mobile app to create those transactions. Or invoices, they can actually process a sales receipt and with QuickBooks payments get paid right there in the field. So the mobile app is more than just entering transactions. It can actually be used to, well, I mean, enter transactions, but actually can be used to bring money into the company. So.
Yeah, I have a client who he builds fences, and he has a fencing company, and he uses the mobile app on his iPad. And what's really great is he's sitting in front of the customer. He can do the estimate right there. He can send it to them, email it to them, text it, and then if they're ready to go, he can have them actually sign and approve the estimate and get a deposit right there. Convert that estimate to an invoice, and he uses QuickBooks payments. And I'm going to say I was somebody who was a I mean, like die hard, digging my heels. I'm not going to pay credit card fees. I don't need to do that. But now I can't even imagine not having it. He uses the QuickBooks payments, and so right then he can like close the deal and doesn't have to wait and have them kind of like think about it and maybe change their mind or drag it out. He can just do the estimate, create an invoice, get a deposit right there. And we don't have slides for it, but one of the and the reason why is it is just now rolling out. There is a new estimate to invoice process. Like I mentioned, I have 40 some odd clients, and I only have 2 clients that it has been activated in, and it makes that like estimate to invoice process much easier, much faster. It's really cool.
So next we're going to talk about specifically customer workflow, entering transactions in QBO when we're recording sales and receiving money. And there are two different uh, processes. One is based on a cash basis business, and we're really just talking about recording the sale, and receiving payment contemporaneously. So retail or anytime when sale is occurring at the same time as money is being received. So in that scenario, there are two transactions to record, a sales receipt and then a deposit. And I think what I'd like to do is show it. So we're here in a company and we're going to create a sales receipt on our customer list. So our customer is going to be Betty's White Burroughs for Betty White. And what are we selling? Burroughs. We're going to do 5 Burroughs. So we've got this sale ready to go. And notice here there's a deposit to account. The deposit to account should really be set to undeposited funds. And we're going to talk more specifically about that in a few.
Which, if you have a new subscription, I'm interrupting, I'm being rude, and I'm going to say, wait, hold up. If you have a newer subscription, they actually changed the name of this account to money to deposit, which makes a lot more sense for people who are new to QuickBooks in general. And the way that I have historically, I think money to deposit is very self-explanatory. It lets the user know, like, hey, I have this money that I have received. I just need to now take it to the bank. And the way I explain undeposited funds / money to deposit this account to my clients when they're first learning QuickBooks is it's the accounting system equivalent to a cash drawer. You have taken the money in, you're hanging on to it, you just haven't taken it to the bank. And so that's why we use undeposited funds. And Bryce is going to show you, the sales receipt and then the invoice receive payment and then the make deposit so that you can see why we do it in relation to making sure everything matches the bank statement at the end of the month and doing bank reconciliations. So I just wanted to call out that money to deposit thing.
So there is an option here for putting the money directly into the bank account. We're going to use undeposited funds in this example, and we'll get into why a little bit later. Yeah. So we're going to save this transaction. We have recorded the sale of these Burroughs, and we have received payment. Here we've got the payment method as a check. So we can save that transaction. Now, when our second step in this cash basis business example, excuse me, is to do a bank deposit. When we choose bank deposit, we're going to see this sales receipt that we just created. It's waiting to be deposited. So we're going to select that. We're going to set the bank account into which we want these funds to go. And then we're going to do a save and close. Now we've recorded the sale. And if we go into our bank register, we will see the deposit for those Burroughs that we sold here on January. So that's the simple cash basis transaction workflow. If we switch gears to a business where they're sending out an invoice and then the customer has a certain amount of time to pay, then we add a step. So we create the invoice that records the sale, but there's no payment yet. So then the second step is to receive the payment. And then the third step is to deposit the payment into the bank. So if we go back to QBO, on our customer column here, we're going to create an invoice. And we're going to sell this time to Clily, the tuxedo cat.
Which is one of my cats. She's a very good customer. You'll see she has many sales in there. She purchases a lot of churros and Burroughs.
We're going to sell some churros. The price seems a little low on churros, so we're going to up that to, say, $5. So now we've made the sale. Notice there's no reference to payment on the invoice. So we save this transaction. And then our second step is to do a receive payment right below invoice on customer. When we select the customer's name, it's going to say, hey, there's an invoice outstanding. Is the payment for this invoice? So we can just check that off and say, yeah, we got the payment. And maybe we got the payment a couple days later. And notice here, just like on the sales receipt, we have the deposit to account. So we want to set this to undeposited funds. We could set it direct to the bank account, but we want to set it to undeposited funds so we have a consistent workflow. And we're going to save that receipt payment transaction. And then the third step is to do a bank deposit, just like we did with the sales receipt. The bank deposit maybe is going to be early next week. It's going to say, hey, you got this payment out there, and you might have multiple payments and or sales receipts that need to be deposited. And that's why we're using undeposited funds, so that what we deposit in the bank, so that the receipt payments and sales receipts total agrees to our bank statement deposit. So, you can
Yes.
have many items on a deposit slip.
And the
So
reason why we go over this and why it's so important is because it is very difficult when you are doing a bank reconciliation at the end of the month to try. This is an easy situation because the numbers are very simple. There's only a couple of transactions. But if you are taking 10 checks or 5 checks and a bunch of cash to the bank. I do a lot of work with auto repair shops. I have a lot of repair shops as clients. It's really important for us to make sure that the deposits in QuickBooks match the deposits in that are hitting the bank, so that I don't have to try and figure out which 30 checks from that day's deposit match the statement. So using undeposited funds or money to deposit will reduce the teeth gnashing and the hair pulling that would be possible or probably probable at the end of the month, trying to figure out which deposits on the statement match the deposits in QBO.
And this is kind of these are the actual physical forms of the workflow where we're invoicing customers. The undeposited funds example here is it's shown as one payment. Well, I mean, but it really could be multiple payments, just like Stacy mentioned. So you can have 30, 50, many payments that go in on that deposit slip. And I think that's why, if we go back to that make deposit on the far right, I think of that as a really accurate representation. My father had a hardware store, and so we would take all of the checks and put them in a bank bag and fill out the deposit slip. So having the deposit in QBO match the amount on the bank statement is critical to be able to match when we go to reconcile the bank statement at the end of the month, to be able to say, oh yeah, here, this $10,000 deposit that we see on the bank statement, that's right there in the register. It may be 5 or 6 different transactions within QBO, but they're all grouped on a deposit. So that's a really critical element that we feel really strongly about, because that's one of the areas where business owners tend to overlook or do those things out of step. So we've got just other examples of sales transactions. We talked about the invoice and the sales receipt. We've also got estimates, which do not actually post to the books, but they are an offer out to a customer. And then there's a credit memo where you're giving a customer credit back to be applied to the total customer balance due. And then we've also got, we do a sales receipt. If the return comes in, we can then issue a refund receipt where we're paying that money back to the customer. And then there's also the concept of a delayed charge, which means I've done something today. I want to add it to an invoice in the future, so I can enter that as a delayed charge. It doesn't post to the books. It just kind of sits there and waits to get added to an invoice. And delayed credit is the same thing, where the business owner decides, I want to credit the customer for whatever reason. It's going to be something that I subtract from the invoice at the end of the week, end of the month, so that can be done as a delayed credit.
Can I give good examples of both a delayed charge and a delayed credit?
Of course.
So I have a client who he just does lawn cuttings. He's not, a full-blown landscaping company. And when we first started working with him, um, he was sending out an invoice for every cutting, which means clients were getting 4 invoices every month, which means that the clients were not able to keep track of it and invoices were going unpaid. So when we started working with him, we said, let's, instead of doing delayed charges, instead of doing invoices every week, let's do a delayed charge every week. And every time you go and do a cutting, you can go, you can just create the delayed charge, and then at the end of the month, we can create the invoice, and the invoice will pull those transactions onto those delayed charges. And so he uses a delayed credit. And then once he got used to that, I should say, once he got comfortable doing that and entering those delayed charges manually, one of the things that QBO allows users to do is create recurring transactions. So you can do a recurring sales receipt, you can do a recurring invoice to send to your customers if it's a monthly thing. And what he decided to do was when he would start a new contract with a customer, he would just automate the delayed charges so that they would happen every week. And then at the end of the month, if there was a week where he didn't do a cutting, maybe because it was raining or what have you, he would just go in and enter that delayed credit, and then everything would get, so he really only had to remember, once he got used to using QuickBooks Online and using the delayed charges and using the recurring transactions, he really only had to remember to go in and enter the delayed credit for the cuttings that didn't happen. So those are 2 ways. And I had never seen a client need to use a delayed credit until then. So just an example of how those can be used.
Super. So next we're just going to dive in a little more on the Sales Center. We actually highlighted when we were talking about navigation, the sales area. And this is just to point out, we can go to all sales, we can see that money bar, and we actually showed that. You can also specifically dive in on an overview of sales, so you can see what sales activity has happened. You can look at, this is just showing that within the all sales area, you can see the paid status. Sales receipts, of course, are always in a paid status. So that's funny that I would think this would be better shown if it were a list of invoices showing the paid status. Here we can just focus in on invoices. So if we have some transactions where, we're a business where some of what we sell gives terms to customers and others are cash only requirement, to pay when they're purchasing.
Mm-hmm.
We want to distinguish those 2. So at some points we're just focusing on collections. We just want to see invoices. There's another way we can see sales is to look at customers, where we can see customer balances. And then finally, there's a products and services tab, and that's where we're setting up items that we're going to sell on invoices and sales receipts that are linked to income accounts. So we set up a product or service and we tell it what we want it to do behind the scenes with the accounting. And this also gives us another layer of reporting. So now we can report on how many of a given product or service are we selling, how profitable is it,
which is most popular.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like lots of different things that you can do with that. Can you show real quick how to set up we call them items because items is a lot of, it's fewer syllables than products and services. So if you hear somebody say your item list in QBO, it's products and services.
So here we're going to create a new product or service. We're going to say this is a non-inventory thing. So it is a product, but it's not something that we really inventory. It's just a very short term or ordered specifically per customer. So we're in the Churros and Burros in company. So I'm going to say this is churro sugar with, oh no, I don't know how to spell cinnamon.
You could just put widget or
Did I do it right?
I
Straight
don't know,
off
I
the
can't
bat?
really see it.
I would think it would give me a squiggly if I didn't. What if I put two in? Yeah. Wow. Lucky guess. So we can assign a category that's not required.
And a
What,
category is just another way of tracking your different products and services if you need to.
so we have a couple of options. One is, well, I mean, we really need to assign it. You don't really need to assign it a price even, but it is important to have an income account associated with the product or service.
Yes.
So this is churro sugar with cinnamon. So we're going to have this hit the churro sales account when we sell it. We can also have a product or service be used on the purchasing side. And this way we can really measure profitability of the product itself because we can say, we know what we bought of churros, we know what we sold of churros, show us the total income that net of our cost, our margin on this product. So our cost is going to be $10, and then we're going to set this to organic, vegan, shark safe scrub. We'll go with that.
The other thing I want to comment on is with this, when you set up an item, when you set up a product or service and you set the income account and the expense account, you can use these on all the purchase transactions. So you can use this item because it has a sales account. You can use it on sales receipts and invoices, things like that. If we click that box and create a two-sided or a double-sided item to be able to use it on bills, checks, expenses, purchase orders, this also is doing all of the behind the scenes accounting, right? So if you have users who they don't like, maybe you have an employee, you can train them all the time whenever you're entering a check or an expense or a bill, you can use this item. So they don't have to worry about what account, what expense or cost of goods account. If they're using the item, you know that it's always posting to the correct income account or the correct expense or cost of goods account.
Yeah, I've even had cases where I've created a product or service that
It's
is the
just use
name
this.
of the vendor just to make it easy
Mm.
on the person who's doing the entry who may not really uh,
That's such a great idea.
well, thank you. Who may not really want to spend a lot of time thinking about, or does a very, very poor job of considering what account to use.
Yeah.
I am astonished at, in my experience, uh, I'm working with really small businesses, so it's typically the person who's doing, customer reception, answering the phone, is also doing some of the QuickBooks stuff,
Hmm.
and that individual really doesn't have the bandwidth or, skills to be consistent. I
Or
don't know
it's just
why.
overwhelming. I
Yeah,
mean,
that too.
this last 2 years has been very overwhelming for a lot of people. And I know many people who have had COVID, they legit brain fog is like a thing. Um, and there are times where you just get busy. I just had a client email me right before this about a 1099. And when she entered the payment back in January of 2021, she entered it in with her old landlord and not the current landlord. So she had me do two 1099s. And it's just one of those things where it was right after her super busy season because she's a bakery. It was right after the holiday season. It was in the middle of a pandemic. And she's like, I have no idea what I was thinking. She's like, I did not send it to Duke. I sent it to I don't know why I entered it that way. So, and sometimes people just get overwhelmed and they just don't have time, or they, like me, I will fat finger something and just put it in the wrong way. Like it's almost as if I'm just mashing buttons sometimes. So there's all sorts of reasons why you want to set these items up. I think it just, at the end of the day, it just makes it easier.
And yes, absolutely, products and services can be used for inventory. With QBO Plus and Advanced, inventory is one of the items. I think in the sample that I was in, we didn't, it's QBO Essentials. Yeah, so we don't have inventory, but if we
No,
do,
I think this is plus. We just don't have inventory turned on.
oh, well said. Yep.
So that's the
So,
other thing I want to call out about the products is that reminds me, if you have a QuickBooks Online Plus account and you're not able to turn inventory on, or you're not seeing certain reports that you're expecting to see because those features are available in that subscription level, it could mean that that feature just is not turned on. So like this is plus, and so we could have multi-currency, but we don't have it turned on. So I just wanted to call that out.
okay, so so that's the overview when we focus on customers and money in. And then we talked about, we actually showed a sales receipt transaction. So these screenshots are just as an alternative to having done it live. So it's just showing the creation of sales receipt, the different fields that are required. And then with invoicing, not only are we able to create the invoice and send it to the customer, but the invoices in QBO are, I mean, it sounds like too much repetition of the word online because almost everything is online. But the nature of an invoice in QBO, the online invoice, is such that the customer is going to get an email where they're clicking on a link that takes them to the invoice. The invoice lives in the cloud. So, or as Vince Vaughn says in the that movie where they're the interns or something, maybe mixing it
I
up.
don't know.
But he says in the clouds, and I think it's funny. So I always say I'm ordering something on the line and that things are in the clouds.
Like when
So
I say it's on the Twitters.
that's right. So this invoice, while it is in QBO, it is also a live document. So if you make changes to an invoice in QBO, the next time the customer goes and looks at that invoice, they're going to see the latest, greatest version of that invoice. So here we're creating a new invoice, and we've got all of our different fields on the invoice. And then what's going to happen, I like this next screen that shows the overall timeline. So we've created an invoice. Step one, we click send. Step two, the customer is actually clicking, they open the email, and then you can have the invoice attached to the email, or you can make it so that the customer needs to click on view invoice in order to see it. Stacy, do you have any feelings on the options around attaching a PDF or just having the link in the email?
Funny you should ask. If you're using QuickBooks Payments, I'm not a fan of having the PDF because there is no incentive for the recipient to click the link, which will get to the payment portal. So if you're using QuickBooks Payments, I think the link is great because then they get the option to pay it right then, and they're more likely to do it. If they have my experience, and I could be wrong, I am often, is that with the PDF attached, they may just look at it and file it and think, oh, I'll get to that later. But when they have the link to make the payment, they can click on it and just make the payment right away, and it's just done.
Fantastic. So here we can see the reasons why we want to use online invoicing, why we want it to be available to the customer. And then here's what the image of what Stacy's talking about, where we can actually see as the merchant, has our invoice been viewed by our customer? And then of course, how and when it was paid. And then again, back to QuickBooks Payments. If QuickBooks Payments is being used and allows the customer to pay by ACH or by credit card, then the received payment is going to be recorded automatically, and the deposit is going to be recorded automatically, and it's going to batch those deposits. So there's a lot of automation and consistency that comes along with QuickBooks Payments.
Yeah.
It feels funny because You know, I really don't have anything to gain by more people subscribing to QuickBooks Payments. I just believe in it so much, and I know it comes off as kind of cultish because I'm such a fan of QuickBooks Payments. It really transformed my business so much, and
Yeah.
I've seen that happen for clients that I can't help but be that excited about it.
I mean, I will agree the same for me. Like I said, I was very like dig in my heels. I do not need credit card payment fees, and I now cannot imagine, I really can't imagine running my business without them. I mean, we do almost exclusively sales receipts that are automated sales receipts for all of our monthly clients, and it's magic. I just want to say, magic.
Well said.
Thank you. And I
So
don't
this is
get money from that. I just love it that much. Like we don't get commission or anything for that.
well, for me, I had a lot of stress early on in my business waiting for money to arrive. And so the fact that this automated things on the money inside was a
Yeah.
great relief to a self-employed individual like myself. So here's what the customer sees through the process. So I take that back. This is what we see as the merchant, where you're going to get an email from QuickBooks Payments that says, hey, you just received a payment.
Hmm.
And then a few days later, or within a week or so, that money is going to be in the bank. And all of that workflow records automatically within QBO. Anything else to highlight on money in? I'm trying to
No,
think.
it's just it's great.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about if we need to enter a payment, if we're not using QuickBooks Payments for whatever reason, then we can do that in a few different ways. One way would be to go to our customer center where we see our list of customers. We can click on the money bar, and whatever color we click, it's going to filter what we see in the grid below. So here we're just looking at overdue invoices. And then notice in the far right, the next available action in the workflow is highlighted. So here we can say we want to do a receive payment for this money due from Amy's Bird Sanctuary. When we enter that payment, and we really showed this initially in the workflow when we were going through first create an invoice, second receive a payment, third make a deposit. So this is that same process where we've got the deposit to account set to undeposited funds. We've checked off the invoice. And then next we do a create deposit. What I like about this create deposit example is it shows that we have two payments that are going to be grouped as one deposit. So this is that deposit slip example. And then this also highlights that we can add something to even that's not a customer deposit. So if there's some, rebate from a credit card that comes as a check, we can add that to a deposit separate from our customer workflow. In other words, for a credit card rebate, you wouldn't want to go to the process of creating a sales receipt because that's not a customer. You're not selling something in your business. You just want to hit the reduce an expense account or hit some other income account so we can
Hmm.
add that on to a deposit. So it doesn't have to be just customer related items. So then we're going to switch gears to our money out workflow. And we already looked at our expenses center where we have our vendors tab. We can see all of our vendors. And if we want to create a new vendor, we can use that green action button in the upper right. For our money out workflow, we've got a few different options about how we get it into QBO. So one is to record an expense transaction. If we have a debit by that I mean a reduction in our bank account or a credit card charge, we can do that through an expense transaction type. We also have a check transaction type, which is just an expense with a check number. It is its own transaction type within QBO. So we can record a check for money out. Or the third option, in many cases, especially for credit cards, business owners will just use the bank feed as the initial point of entry. They'll wait for the transactions to come in. I shudder to think about how often this is used because my preference, of course, is that someone uses the mobile app so that the receipt is attached to the transaction. But I'll just like Zen perspective that for the time being. If we're recording transactions through bank feed, we can enter the transactions in that way and then attach the receipt to the transaction within bank feed. For an accrual-based, not an accrual-based business really, but dealing with a vendor who gives the business owner terms, then a bill can be entered, and then that bill will later require a bill payment.
Mhm.
So in that case, we'll do an enter bill and then a pay bill. We've got lots of, all of the vendor money out transaction types are shown here. A couple we didn't talk about, there's the purchase order, which is an advance authorization to a vendor to basically contract for products and services. And then there's a credit card credit that I think is important to highlight. If we return something, we're going to have a reduction in the balance that we owe the credit card company, and it's an anti-expense. That transaction type in QBO is a credit card credit, so we can see that within our plus new. If we were in here in Churros and Burros under vendors, there's credit card credit. And you might be thinking, why is Bryce spending so much time on the credit card credit? And the reason is it's kind of hiding there. And I think the term is a little bit funny, credit card credit. Why doesn't it say refund or return or something? But such is terminology. No
Right.
easy way.
Well, that's a good thing to mention about the terminology in QuickBooks. I forgot to mention this earlier, is a bill is always something that is something in QuickBooks. It's always something that is related to a vendor, and an invoice is always something that is related to a customer. So if you are talking to a QuickBooks person, like a QuickBooks consultant, or one like a pro advisor like Bryce or I, one of the things, Bryce or myself, I should say, one of the things that they may say to you is, if you say, "Oh, I have this invoice," we may say, is it an invoice that you sent to your customer or that you got from a vendor? And so that's what we're kind of thinking about, because as QuickBooks, like pro advisors, as people who live in QBO and QuickBooks in general all day, when we think invoice, it is always something that is sent to a customer. So I just wanted to call that out.
Well said. So
Thank you.
we also want to just make sure you're familiar with the expenses area of QBO. So we touched on this earlier in navigation, but this is just to highlight that you can actually recategorize transactions one by one here in the expenses area. So if one user entered a transaction through bank feed and they didn't know what category it went to, the default is uncategorized expense, they went ahead and said add. I know, it's scary, but it happens. So in that scenario, we can actually, right here in the expenses center, just choose like that top one where it says category automobile. We can click on that drop down and change it to office supplies or whatever is applicable. So we've got some ability to go in and review how the transactions have been recorded and also correct how they've been recorded. And then we also have a vendors tab. In the vendors tab, it's just another place. We may go always to plus new to do enter bill, pay bill.
Mm-hmm.
But if we know there's something specific to a vendor, that might be easier just to start with the vendor. So
Yeah.
here we can go to the vendor tab, and then let's actually go out into, so if we go to our vendors area, We may know the name of the vendor. We know it contains churro. So we can search for all of the vendors with that. So here we go, oh yeah, it was burro-shaped churros and churro-scented burros. That's definitely the vendor. So here we can go to create a bill for that vendor. Or we can look at all of the open bills that we have and make a payment on a vendor bill that's outstanding. So this is just highlighting those action items within the vendor center, an alternative to the plus new. To add a new vendor in our vendor center, we just use that green action button in the upper right, which is pretty consistent through QBO. We're going to enter all of our basic information about the vendor, and we can even specify, we don't have a screenshot on it, but right below there where it says business ID number, should really say tax ID number. There's a checkbox right below there that says track payments for 1099, because we can actually issue 1099s through QBO.
Yep.
So that's the vendor setup and dealing with vendors in terms of enter bill, pay bill. At a more basic level, we're just going to be entering expenses that are coming out of the checking account or being charged to a credit card. So anytime we can even use, I have to be careful about the way I say this. We can even start an expense transaction where we have a vendor who has an open bill. So we can use an expense, and then, in fact, maybe I'll show this because it's pretty cool. So we have a vendor bill open for Dorothy here. So let's say at the moment I'm entering the transaction, I don't really know that we have a bill outstanding for Dorothy. So I'm just going to write Dorothy an expense or a check. As soon as I select Dorothy as the vendor, it's going to say over here on the right, hey, there's a bill outstanding. Do you want to add this bill to the expense?
I love this.
When we click add, it turns it. Notice what happened in the upper left. It turned our expense transaction into a bill payment automatically. So that's pretty darn cool.
Yeah.
So we can really use an expense transaction for a few different things, and it'll catch us if we have a bill outstanding for a vendor. It'll remind us that we can add that bill. Or maybe you're making a separate payment to the vendor. You're really not paying that outstanding bill. You can just continue with the expense. So parallel universe there. So we're creating a new expense transaction. Expenses, we want to have a vendor associated with each expense. And the reason is we want to be able to go into the vendor center, highlight that vendor, and see the history of transactions related to that vendor. Vendor name is not actually a required field on an expense, but we want to play like it is. Because if we don't assign a vendor to an expense transaction, then we're not going to be able to see that on reports if we do expenses by vendor summary, for example, or vendor expenses by month. We won't see that, and we won't see the transaction in the vendor center for that vendor name. So Stacy and I are aligned that always we want a vendor associated with an expense.
Yeah.
And we can add one right here as we're entering the expense transaction. You do not need to go out to the vendor center, create a new vendor, and then come back in to enter an expense. You can just add them on the fly with this add new option.
Yep.
And then in an expense transaction, we're showing the payment account. It could be the checking account if it's a debit that's coming direct, or it could be a credit card. And if you choose a credit card and then you forgot you use the debit card that was processed as Master Money or Visa Debit, then you can change the payment account after the fact. So that's pretty cool, and not something you can do in QuickBooks Desktop.
Yeah.
So then finally, we'll assign either a category or, as Stacy mentioned earlier, notice below there it says item details. That's
Mm-hmm.
referring to products or services. So even within QBO, it mixes up products, services, and items. So those are synonymous. So we can assign the category, put it in description, put it in amount, and voila. If you enter the transaction ahead of time in QBO, you know you have the expense, you do it through the mobile app or in a browser. Then later, when it comes in through bank feed, and I mean, we'll talk about bank feed in the next week, but it'll then be a matched transaction. So there's no risk of duplicating the entry just by entering it in advance.
Yeah.
And then we can write a check. That's our, separate from an expense transaction, we have a check transaction type. And the check has a couple of unique attributes. One, it has a check number, and the other is a check is allowed to be printed. So over there by the number 3, we can put in the check number, or we can check the box that says print later so that we can run a batch of printed checks. So you're going to say, here's what the starting number of the check run is, and then they can all print out.
And then make sure if you do that, that you are doing the printer alignment before you do the check. And also the other thing that I would suggest if you are printing multiple checks is don't click OK until all of the checks are in your hot little hands. The minute you say, yeah, they all printed, is the minute that your printer is going to eat half of them, and then you have to start the process all over again. At least, I mean, I speak from my own personal printer hell. I'm just saying, like, it's a thing that it's exhausting.
So transaction wise, we've talked about expenses, we talked about checks, the entry workflow, and finally we're going to talk about entering a bill.
Yeah.
So you receive a bill from a vendor. As Stacy mentioned, invoices are related to customers, bills are related to vendors. So to enter the bill, we can use the plus new and enter a bill there, or within the vendor center on the expenses tab, we can choose this new transaction to enter a bill. Very similar to the expense transaction entry area where we're selecting a vendor. We've assigned a category, or you could assign a product or service if you have products and services set up. We're assigning the amount, and then we're saving that bill. That, when we save it, increases our accounts payable and increases our expense. And then that bill is waiting out there to be paid. But wait, there's more. You can add an attachment, and this applies not only to a bill, but any transaction within QBO, we can add an attachment. So if the receipt is out there as a JPEG or a PDF of a printed email confirmation, that sort of thing, you can just drag it right into the attachments area. You can have as many attachments as you want per transaction. There's just a maximum of 25 megabytes per file, which is pretty liberal. I've not had a case where I've run up against that within QBO.
Right. Right.
I mean, what would you be buying? Caterpillar tractor, I don't think would have enough pages to fill 25 megabytes. But
I don't.
the contract for a Caterpillar tractor, I should say. So once that bill is entered, then it's time to pay the bill. Ka-chunk, paid in full. So we do a pay bill within QBO. Again, one of two ways. We can go to the plus new in the upper left and choose pay bill. Or here in the vendor center, we can find a bill that's open and choose make payment. Or we could be on the expenses area and say new transaction bill payment. So multiple ways to get there. Here, we're paying a bill. Oh, this is actually, PG&E is the vendor. I'm in California, so in Northern California, I should say. So PG&E is our vendor for utilities, Pacific Gas and Electric. I don't think they're located in Palo Alto. At least our closest PG&E is not. But that's not the point. So here we can just pay this bill by checking the box where the bill is down below. That'll populate the amount. We're setting the checking account as the payment source. It could be a credit card. You could pay a bill via credit card, and then we can save that transaction. That's going to eliminate the accounts payable and reduce the balance in the bank account or increase the balance due to the credit card to the bank. And then finally, this I think this slide is a bit out of place, but
Yeah.
just reaffirming the the print checks option. You can click on plus new and then choose print checks, and that's going to take you into the print check workflow.
Yeah.
So with that, do we have any questions outstanding? I haven't looked at the.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Does anybody have any questions or any hand raised or anything? Anything you need clarification on? We have about 10 minutes left.
I don't, pardon me, I don't see any. I do have a question though.
Great.
Sure.
Well, first off, I feel your pain about having to be sure to adjust the printer for your pre-printed checks. Yeah, that's tragic when you print a whole bunch and
It
they're all,
is tragic.
yeah, half on the check and half on the printer spool. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, now we know you've actually done that. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly how it goes.
I have done that. I have done that.
That struggle is real.
It really is. It really is. A question I have, and there's a kind of a backstory. I used to work in two different systems. One computer system that handled invoicing and payment collecting, but then I also had QBO that handled bank account. So invoices sent from this first system and received and input into the first system. Then I had to go into QuickBooks and make sure that it was accounted for in the bank account. Is there a good way to handle that instead of having to put invoice and payment and then same invoice and same payment?
Oh, to duplicate that? Is there any reason why the invoice has to be in both systems? Or could you just pull in like as a deposit? I don't know. What do you think, Bryce? I'm thinking like maybe could you just do a deposit if it's just about recording the sales?
Yeah, I'm not clear on the scenario. Can you say that again?
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
The system was it tracked memberships.
Okay.
And
Oh, a third-party system.
yeah, a completely different system that I had to use. It tracked memberships, it tracked my website and everything. And so everything, that system was the tracking system of record. But
Oh,
I
right.
had to make sure that the bank account, which was tracked in QBO, it matches the two. The
Oh.
two of them are okay.
So I don't think that there's any reason to do invoice in both systems. I think as long as the deposits are being posted into QuickBooks to a revenue account, you've got the source of truth in the membership software, so you can always go see the history as long as the money is sitting in. We do this a lot. So I have a client who literally just texted me, literally in actuality just texted me. She has a bakery, and so she has a lot of online sales. I have another client who has a membership system. We don't track individual sales in QuickBooks Online because all of that lives in either their point of sale or their membership.
Gotcha.
We just pull in the deposits, and then we make sure if there's any payments that are associated, like processing fees, that those are recorded as well. So so if it's a net deposit, we want to make sure that we're somehow recording any processing fees. So my membership guy, we use a third-party app called Cinder that pulls in from his Stripe account. So all of those the Stripe fees and the processing fees all get calculated. And then as far as the point of sale system, for my other client, she we just dump in the deposits from her point of sale system because we don't really need to track sales tax or anything like that. They're doing that outside of QuickBooks. So I don't see any reason to have to do a one-to-one copy in QBO.
Gotcha.
Right. I mean,
Gotcha.
even if you can, it's often not of value, and it just kind of can create unnecessary madness. I think about there's a client I used to have a travel lodge out very near the Golden Gate Bridge, and so they had a whole system for doing, for recording revenue and reservations and all of that. And so all we did in QBO is just record the deposits as income and get the fees, that they paid to Travelodge corporate and stuff. Another neat thing about that Travelodge I learned about the hotel business is they asked every guest when they were checking out, like, did you have a good experience at the hotel? If the guest said they had a good experience, they'd give them one card that said to do a review on TripAdvisor or whatever. If they had a bad experience, the hotel had a whole separate card underneath that was like an internal report. And I thought that was funny.
Oh, that's interesting.
So they only got positive reviews. Because if the customer said, no, it wasn't that great of a stay or there was some problem, they would give them the here report to Travelodge, like an internal system.
I'm gonna start doing that.
Clever.
Okay, I see that. Yeah, they got really good reviews, I imagine.
Exactly.
How big a transition is it going from desktop to online?
So it depends. Honestly, that's a very difficult thing to answer. Some people, I just did a bunch of training sessions, very much like this, but they were all custom to what this business was doing. And I was training 4 people at the same time. And 3 of them, it was no problem, super easy. The 4th one, she just was struggling. And so I think it's going to depend on what type of business, the individuals, how complex the workflow and the process is internally. So it's not an easy answer. I think it's ridiculously simple to make the transition, but I've been doing this for 17 years. So
one of the biggest things I see is that someone's just used to the very click path that they're using in desktop, and they expect to see that same click path in QBO because it's called QuickBooks. And so just that can be a hurdle. So surprisingly, like Stacy, I'm surprised that that's the case because we're doing the same thing, enter bill, pay bill, enter expense, but for some reason, just the interface and the lack of familiarity can be
Yeah, the difference between the flow chart and the menu and everything can be done.
I know I used to have a podcast for 10 years, and my partner on the podcast, I remember when she first started using QBO, she struggled, and she's a pro advisor like me, and she said one of the things was, I know exactly how many times I have to tab to get and then hit enter when I'm done. So it was for her a muscle memory thing. Just about, and just learning just the different program. But I mean, she loves it now, so she uses it all the time. So it just depends on the individual and what the process was in desktop versus what the process needs to be in QBO, and a lot of different X factors. Somebody's just having a bad day.
Yeah, I made the transition, and it took a minute. It took about 5 minutes to get used to it.
Yeah.
It works the same way.
It really does. A check is a check is a check. The screen just looks different in the different versions of QuickBooks. Yep.
Well, I'm not seeing any additional questions.
Well, I will say this, if there aren't any questions and anybody who's here thinks of some between now and our next session, make sure that you write them down, because we'll have plenty of time in our Intro to QBO Part 2, and we can answer those. I know I will have 0 questions when I am in some sort of class, and I will walk away or log out, and then I think of about 100.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Feel free to ask them next week if you need to.
I am going to share my screen here. You guys, this was wonderful. Really appreciate your time and your expertise, and thank you for sharing all of this. I'm really looking forward to next week and then the following webinars that we have coming up with y'all.
I can't wait. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, we've been excited to do this. We've been wanting to do it for quite some time. Um, just want to remind everyone that I really do appreciate you attending the webinars, and uh, you're going to get a survey in your email. And if you would fill that out and let us know what you think about our webinars, and give us some ideas of some items that you'd like to see covered, uh, more information you'd like to hear about. Also, include your email address on that survey, and we'll make sure that you get a link to our YouTube channel so that you can come back to this webinar as well as any others that we have on our YouTube channel. You see, I'm sorry, I've just gone totally blank all of a sudden. You see on the screen here, these are upcoming webinars. Tomorrow, no, Thursday, we have a double header. So pinpointing your target market with Melissa Forziat and Team Conflict, how to make it productive. That will be a good one with Lorna Kibbe.
Yeah, that does sound very interesting.
It really does. And we have a new presenter coming in on Monday talking about what to consider when choosing your business structure. That's a really hot topic as well. Then you guys are back on Tuesday, and then we have Rebecca Schultz, one of our great folks, coming back that same day, another double header, using government debt strategically. You can access our website at sbdc.nctc.edu, and there you can find all sorts of resources. You can schedule an appointment with an advisor. You can get any kind of web contact information, but you can also register for the webinars there, as well as using that QR code in the upper right-hand corner. We've really enjoyed this. Thank you all for attending. Some folks I'd like to acknowledge. We are grant funded, as mentioned at the beginning, and we'd like to recognize the Small Business Administration, the state of Texas, North Texas SBDC Regional Office, North Central Texas College. They are our benefactors, and it's because of them we can offer our services and resources to you at no cost. Thank you all for joining today, and we look forward to seeing you come back on Thursday for pinpointing your target market and Team Conflict, then next week for part 2 of QBO. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.